Abstract, noted. Please have read it. Thank you, Peter. You're very kind, and thank you all for attending the talk and the conference. It's been great. It is a truism that Constantinople fostered the development of Byzantine art and architecture in a way that was paradigmatic for Eastern European and Eurasian expressions of Christianity. But it is no less the case that it influenced Western European art and architecture in late antiquity, the so-called Dark Ages and beyond. In the first instance, this influence was limited to the shared patrimony of Roman architecture inherited by the Church when it was publicly legitimized by the Emperor Constantine in the 4th century AD, with embellishments leading to the development of the Romanesque style. This style prevailed in both the cities of Constantinople and Rome until a more distinctive Byzantine aesthetic developed in the former in both Asia Minor and the Near East and spread westwards to Greece and Italy. Apsed, cruciform or cross-in-square churches topped by single or multiple domes, especially a central or more prominent trullo, that would eventually become adorned with an image, fresco or mosaic of Christ Pantokrator, the ruler of all. These soon popped up all over the Mediterranean. What is important for the current paper is that while many such churches with their exquisite mosaics built during the Byzantine period within Constantinople have either been converted into mosques or destroyed owing to the Ottoman conquest of the city in AD 1453, Byzantine aesthetics, having influenced much of Italy, which was for some time under the empire's administrative control, can still be seen. I mention Italy here and not Greece because the latter suffered from the same fate at the hands of the Ottomans, with extant ecclesiastical architecture surviving from the mid to late Byzantine periods. The extant Italian examples, on the other hand, are in much better condition insofar as Italy was never conquered. This means Italy's Byzantine churches can still be visited in places like Ravenna, which was the Byzantine exarchate in Italy, and Venice. It was Venetian soldiers who, along with Frankish invaders, looted Constantinople during the Fourth Crusade in 1204 and at the same time modelled Venice architecturally and aesthetically upon Constantinople. I'm not doing much for ecumenism in mentioning that, but it was 1,000 years ago. Try just the legacy is there, right? We all appreciate from the East and West, okay? And now I've jumped over to the West, so it's very complicated. In fact, the decline of Byzantine administrative control in northern Italy from the 8th century onwards, marked especially by the capture of the exarchate of Ravenna by the Lombard king Aistulf in 751, created the space for the ascendancy and independence of the Venetian lagoon. And while it would make more sense to begin our analysis of Italy's Byzantine art chronologically with Ravenna and Classe, and then move on to Venice, the reason for me beginning with the latter is because the influence of Byzantine aesthetics on the Veneto, in terms of art and architecture, is so complete that the representations of Christ Pantokrator in San Marco, for example, cover a more or less total range. It's not exhaustive, but it's pretty well there, of possible representations of Jesus predicated on ecclesial or patristic biblical interpretation within Orthodox parameters. Thanks. We will therefore look at these before addressing the more experimental representations of Jesus in Ravenna and Classe. This is partly due to the fact that they are older, in order to derive implications for further ecumenically inspired discussions on Byzantine art. The Patriarchal Cathedral Basilica of San Marco was completed in 1071 and consecrated in 1073, while decorations and additions continued for several centuries, especially after the Fourth Crusade in 1204. Located right next to the Doge of Venice's palace, it was intended as his chapel. It's a nice chapel. More importantly, it was modelled upon the Church of Holy Apostles in Constantinople, which was destroyed shortly after the Ottoman conquest of the city, which means the best way to know what Holy Apostles might have looked like is to simply visit Venice. Get your holiday trip ready. Next slide. Like Holy Apostles, San Marco is in a cruciform design and boasts an impressive 5 domes, designating it as a recapitulation of the Christian worldview, with the cross at the center of the world, symbolized by the domes themselves. Thanks. The interior of the whole structure, its vaults, domes, and upper walls depicted Eastern saints, biblical narratives such as the lives of Jesus and the Virgin, the apostolic message, and the life and the theft of the relics of St. Mark. St. Mark's relics were stolen in the 9th century by the Venetians from Alexandria in Egypt. The pretext was that the Muslims had conquered it, so we need to get the relics out, where they had been since his martyrdom. This gave rise to the association of this city with the saint's emblem, the Lion of St. Mark, which is displayed throughout Venice and prominently in the Piazza San Marco, right in front of the church. Just leave it there. But this did not satiate the Venetians' desire for plunder. For from Constantinople were looted many saints' relics, which can be seen in San Marco's treasury, along with gold, metal, enameled and carved Byzantine artifacts of astonishing value. Also notable for art historians, especially these bronze horses of Lysippus from Constantinople. I just put them in there because I got thrown out of the museum above the church for taking that photo. So, despite the rich array of imagery throughout St. Mark's that we have already addressed, and apart from images of Christ Pantokrator above, the entrance into the nave, for the sake of Christological conciseness, we will concern ourselves with the underside of the church's domes. The mosaics in these domes date from the 11th to 13th centuries and include the north dome located in the northern transept arm and depicts an aged St. John the Evangelist surrounded by vignettes illustrating his life and miracles in Ephesus. The south dome, which features a simple central cross with four prominent saints, Leonard, Blaise, Nicholas and Clement, depicted on its arms, and the west dome, which depicts the descent of the Holy Spirit. But it is the east dome, located over the presbytery, which illustrates the announcement of the Messiah and features a central medallion of a beardless Christ and young Christ surrounded by the Virgin Mary and 13 prophets. That's a previous one, actually. Go back to. Oh, yeah. Can you go back? There it is. Yeah. No, so I haven't pictured that one. What I'm picturing is this one under the central dome, which depicts Christ's Ascension. These are central to our analysis of Christ as Pantokrator here. Yeah, now move to the next one. It goes without saying that the depiction of the Ascension in the central dome marks the intersection of the church's cruciform design. In this image, a bearded Christ is depicted in a golden tunic and seated upon a golden rainbow. His right hand is extended in the blessing of peace and his left hand holds a scroll. Christ is set within a cosmic mandorla as indicated by the golden stars surrounding him and the coloured layers that unfold in gradations from darker shades to lighter ones, encompassing both him and the stars. The outer ring of the mandorla is carried by four angels who not only lift him up to heaven, but evoke the four angels at the four corners of the world in the book of Revelation. This Christ is therefore an axis mundi intersecting the cosmos, reinforcing the traditional belief in him as Pantokrator, ruler of all. Following the numerological logic of Saints Irenaeus of Lyon and Gregory of Nyssa, the fact that there are four angels symbolizes stability or order, the four cardinal points. Around the angels is a Latin elaboration of the message delivered by two angels to the apostles during Christ's ascension into heaven, as described in Acts. These two angels appear below, flanking the Mother of God on either side. You can't see that, so just take my word for it. They are surrounded by the apostles, between whom are interspersed paradisal trees. You can see it if you go back. Thanks, man. Finally, beneath them are represented, there you are, various female saints and martyrs. This image of the Ascension utilizes complementary symbols in order to convey Christ's mastery over the cosmos. His golden tunic evokes the ancient appellation of Christ as the Son of Righteousness that was used by late antique Christians to divest the sun god Sol Invictus of his power. And this image, which applies solar imagery to indicate the impact Christ's dawning had upon the world, is apt for a depiction of the Ascension where Christ is rising like the sun through the cosmos that he created and has mastery over as Pantokrator. The destination to where Christ ascends, heaven, which can alternately be described as God's kingdom or paradise, is represented by his mother. And the saints who were present at the Ascension and now intercede to Christ to have mercy upon the world. Jump too forward. Christ gives them and all human beings the blessing of peace. Thus in the mosaic, Christ embraces the cosmos and his saints who intercede for the church and the world and whom the members of the church are called to imitate. The mystery of human transformation in him, symbolized by the shaded area of the mandorla, which is close to the body of Jesus, a motif we see repeated later in the 14th century Anastasis fresco in the holy monastery of Chora in Constantinople. That's the paradigmatic image of this. There are many of them, but this is classic. The inscription around the mandorla and the angels lifting Christ from San Marco also indicate that the Son of God will come to judge the world with right judgment, to give all that is due. Next. In other words, there is an eschatological dimension to the Pantokrator that appears again in San Marco's eastern dome, where the Old Testament prophets point to Christ as the coming Messiah. Here Christ is represented beardless, indicating the Son of Man prophesied in the book of Daniel and intertestamental literature, which is also the main epithet Christ used concerning himself. This time Jesus is depicted at the center of a blue starry circle designating the cosmos, evoking Daniel's vision of the Ancient of Days, interpreted by Christians as God the Father who gives the Son of Man dominion over all nations and all peoples. But it is not uncommon to see Christ and God the Father depicted interchangeably as the Ancient of Days, which could be the case here. In any case, since this image of Christ is surrounded by the Old Testament prophets, it can also be considered a prophecy about Christ's first coming, but that it points to his second coming is alluded to by the rainbow surrounding the image of the cosmos. This evokes Revelation chapters 4 and 5, where the recipient of the vision sees someone seated on a throne in heaven holding a scroll, which is Christ, with the throne encircled by a rainbow that shone like an emerald. Christ's mastery over the cosmos therefore extends over all its stages, beginning, middle, and end. Ravenna. The structural exterior and decorated interior of San Marco's, Venice, displays the Byzantine Christ in ways that would become more or less standardized in Eastern Orthodox art and architecture, in the Mediterranean and the Near East, and gradually the Balkans and Eurasia in the Middle and High Middle Ages. While this standardization was again in terms of multivalent theological profundity and clarity, it was also nevertheless underscored by sort of stylistic conformity brought about by tumultuous socio-political and ecclesiastical circumstances, including countless wars, displacement of peoples, iconoclasm, we spoke about some of these before, the Great Schism and the aforementioned Fourth Crusade, which led to the reification of acceptable methods of artistic representations of Christ, as exemplifying Orthodox positions in contradistinction to unorthodox ones, okay? So you don't find the Lamb of God really depicted as a lamb in this period. In fact, it was denounced in the 6th century, but it disappears entirely from the Byzantine world, to give one example. This does not mean that the Church had not for centuries been developing benchmarks by which to represent itself authentically, but theologically experimental artistic representations of Jesus in the Byzantine world, those that would have been considered acceptable in the 6th century were not acceptable by the time you get to the 11th or 13th centuries. I'm not suggesting that the Church embrace for liturgical purposes all and sundry in relation to depictions of Christ, but there is ample evidence for flexibility and experimentation in late antiquity that still fell within Orthodox parameters, and a good case in point is Ravenna. Could you go to the next slide? Now I'm just going to go extemporaneously. Ravenna was the exarchate of the Byzantine Empire in the 6th century. This is the church of Saint Vitale, which is octagonal in design. And what you'll find in this church, for example, if you go to the next slide, in the altar area, 2 side panels depicting the emperor offering the bread, and if you click the next one, and his wife, the empress. So that was Justinian, this is Theodora, bringing the gifts to be consecrated by the bishop ecclesias within the ecclesiastical space. Above them, just above them in the apse, you'll find, for example, typological depictions of Christ. In the lunettes, you have Abel as the first martyr in a way, the righteous one who was sacrificed by the evil Cain. You have Melchizedek, who's a type of Christ, offering bread and the wine, anticipating the Eucharist, right? And the hand of blessing, since God the Father doesn't have a hand, it's Christ's hand, right? Giving the blessing there, the Cairo above. These are standard motifs, okay, that emerge between the 4th and 6th centuries, and then they're everywhere. But if you go to the next image, you will find a beardless, a beardless lamb. No, go to the next image. You will find what I was referring to earlier, okay? The Lamb of God in the 6th century intersecting the cosmos, the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world, according to the book of Revelation, chapter 12 and 13. The 4 angels again intersecting the 4 cardinal points of the universe. This is probably one of the last times you'll see this image in the East, because at the Council of Trullo, within 50-60 years, it's condemned as too ambiguous, too allegorical, if you like. And so it phases out because of a growing incarnational mentality in terms of the Son of God becoming really human, but also not wanting to have any ambiguity in relation to who Christ is and what he's done. This was also spurred on by the fact that in Ravenna you have an Arian baptistry, because it was originally an Arian city before being taken by Justinian and converted to Orthodoxy, showing Christ naked. Okay, they didn't want that. They didn't want naked Christ. They didn't want Christ as a lamb, and so on and so forth. Go to the next slide. Here is beardless, seated upon the globe. Again, one of the last times you'll see this kind of an image in the East. It will phase out. It's more experimental. He's more in the style of an ancient Roman emperor here, the way that you see him in the catacombs, right? He's seated upon the globe. He's surrounded by angels, and he's come as an eschatological king. That's within Ravenna itself. Just outside of Ravenna, same period, 6th century, you find more experimental stuff. If you go to the next image, Sant'Apollinare in Classe, right? Classe is a small town just outside of Ravenna. This is a Basilica church. If the former was an octagonal symbolizing the 8th day God's kingdom design, again, very unique, this is a traditional basilica. If you go to the next slide, stop there, you'll see it in the apse. You have a cross intersecting the cosmos. It's a very, very famous image, right? With Sant'Apollinaris, the martyr from the 2nd century, lifting up his hands at the oran's position in a paradisal garden. Click again, and you'll find that you have at the very center of the cross the face of the Pantokrator, bearded now, contemporaneous with the beardless one. So we're looking at a bit of an evolution, okay, in terms of the imagery. And 3 sheep. Well, Peter, James, and John. Right. And you have Moses and Elijah. So this is actually a symbolic representation of Christ's transfiguration on table, which has cosmic implications because his eternal divine glory that's before the universe and cuts through it is he being manifested but points towards the cross. Remember what Christ says after he discloses his divine glory on table to Peter, James, and John. They totally freak out because Moses and Elijah appear out of nowhere. He says to them, don't tell anyone what happened until the Son of Man is crucified and rises from the dead. So Tabor points to his crucifixion where that divine glory is fully emptied out for us and for our salvation, right? You don't see anything like this again in the Eastern tradition. Nothing like this. Nothing so enigmatic, allegorical, symbolic. It's several hundred years before the standardization of these sorts of motifs that I showed you in Venice, and I showed Venice just to be exotic. I could have shown you Santa Maria Maggiore, I could have shown you Santa Maria Trastevere, both in Rome, San Clemente in Rome. It's standardized now in that tradition. My argument is that both these approaches, influenced by the Byzantine aesthetic, that are still extant within Rome and within Italy, that's predominantly Roman Catholic, right? All of these Roman Catholic churches that I've just mentioned to you have Byzantine Eastern Orthodox art. The Eastern Orthodox churches have similar art, but in the more standardized way that I mentioned, we saw in Venice, throughout the Balkans, throughout Eurasia, Greece, Romania, Serbia, Russia. There's a common point of intersection between Catholicism and Orthodoxy. This was there in the early church, it remains so to this day. Alenka pointed out some examples in the Russian tradition where the churches themselves, they look Baroque, they look like anything that you'd find in Rome itself, right, in St. Petersburg. So the whole point is to share with these historical examples we have more in common than not. Thank you.